Hey, this is Michael Lindsay from Vital MX. Welcome to our 2025 450 Shootout. As you can see, we have 6 new 450 motocross bikes. We have a couple days of testing and 5 test riders. They're each gonna rank the bikes from first to last. We're gonna add up the scores and you can see what our collective opinion is on this video. This is the short and sweet format. I'm gonna spend about 2.5 minutes on each bike explaining why they finished where they did and what the positives and negatives are. But if you want the deep information, also make sure you check out the link in the description below. You can read all the write-ups from every test rider and try to figure out which bike is best for you. Because at the end of the day, we are going to rank these bikes from first to last, but every bike here has a reason, a purpose, and a home. So if you're gonna spend your hard-earned money, we wanna see you get the bike that you are going to enjoy most. So let's answer one major question before getting into the shootout results. Why 6 motorcycles? I know plenty of people sitting here going, where's the Suzuki? Where's the TM? Where's the Beta? Where's this? Where's that? I'm going to cover those really quick. Suzuki RMZ 450 has not changed since 2018. That bike continues to get dead last in our shootout, and we'd rather spend the time working on the bikes that have changed and comparing them. We could have rode the Suzuki this year. It would have got last again across the board, and we would have basically copy pasted our notes. If you're curious how the Suzuki does against these bikes, go check out our past shootouts. You'll get your answer. Why no TM? We basically can't get them in the US. Why no Fantic? Again, we basically can't get them in the US. More the Fantic than the TM. The TMs are almost impossible. The Fantic really is. It's not imported here. We would have to privately buy one and ship it here. Not happening. The last one, what about the Beta 450? They did not have 25 models ready for media at this time, and based on the one we tested earlier this year, it still has some work to do. It would also basically be an automatic finish towards the bottom of the ranks. And at this point, we wanted to focus on the bikes that consumers are definitely juggling. If you're interested in a Suzuki and you know everything about it, you're probably gonna go buy one. If you're interested in everything about the Beta, you probably want that boutique feel and you're gonna go buy one. We tried to compare the 6 bikes that definitely take up the majority of the market and have the most users looking at which one to buy. In future years, Wes will try to continue to add more bikes. We have the Triumph 450 coming in at the end of this year and a Ducati in the future. We'll get back to having a big shootout down the road, but for now, let's focus on the 6 that are really competing for top honors. Bringing up the rear, 6th place, the GasGas MC450F. This bike finished 66546 amongst our test riders for 27 points. This came as a little bit of a shock to us because amongst the Austrian trio, the GasGas is the most different in its own certain way between hard parts, components, suspension settings, etc. And in years past, we've had test riders that didn't like it and test riders that really liked it. However, this year it fell way more into the category of the struggle bus. In years past, something that's been unique about this bike when the Austrian trios were on stiffer chassis, the GasGas was the only one of the 3 that had a European suspension setting. The KTM and Husqvarna have US developed specs for us in the US market. The GasGas uses a worldwide spec. The bike we test here is the same one available worldwide. It is a softer, more active feeling suspension, and when the bike was paired with a stiffer chassis, it did take the edge off. Add that in with the little bit cheaper rims, the cast or forged clamp. It was a little bit softer in character, just certain hard parts on the bike that made the bike feel a little bit more supple compared to its racier brethren. Well, couple that softer feeling parts and suspension with a softer updated chassis, now the bike just feels active and unruly. It was very hard to get it to settle down. It didn't have the prim and polish of its brethren in this case of the Husqvarna and the KTM, and it was overall a bike that had some positives. Some guys still really like the engine character in this bike. The ergos are solid, but it misses out on some of the things that make the other 2 great. The cheaper brake tech brakes and clutch just don't feel as refined on the bike. They feel a little spongier. The bike does come standard with Maxxis tires. We did put Dunlop on, of course, for everything even this test, so for many riders as a base item that is a little bit negative. And overall, yes, it is a little bit less expensive, but when you ride the bike this year compared to the KTM or Husqvarna, pretty much all of our test riders agreed they would still rather spend more money to get a better out of the box bike. The GasGas is not a bad bike. It definitely suits more of a beginner to novice character this year with its features and its overall character on the track, but it doesn't give us really any reason to pick it above the other bikes in this test. Fifth place goes to the Husqvarna FC450, and with a score of 5.4655 for 25 points overall across our test riders, this is a little harsher than we almost expected at the end. We have slammed the Husqvarna FC450 in the past, as many other media outlets have, for the lowered suspension and how harsh the character of it is. We come into it almost predispositioned that it is going to be the worst of the Austrian trio, but this year it surprised us. They have again gone back to work on these suspension settings, and we're starting to get more and more the case reason to have the lowered suspension. Other than the fact that if you're a little on the short side, it is quite nice to have that extra inch out of each end. However, on track, it is easy to turn. That low center of gravity is excellent, especially when there is almost no berm to bank off, whether you're in shallow ruts or on hard pack conditions. This bike does feel planted. Like we said, it is more comfortable in years past, where typically when we ride the low suspension, the most obvious thing, it's a soft lowered setting. It's going to ride even lower in the stroke than its natural settling point, and it's going to feel harsh because of that. This year, they've done a better job of maintaining the ride height, albeit the first thing most of our test riders did is still see, hey, how can we get this bike a little stiffer and a little bit more held up between the bumps? It is, again, the best we've felt in years, and everybody came back pleasantly surprised. But overall, it still also is kind of a niche motorcycle with that setting. It doesn't suit everybody, and because of that, it's very hard to rank it above the other motorcycles. All the air fin finish on the Husqvarna is great. Brakes, clutch, the overall ergonomics feel of the motorcycle, quality of components is great. The power, like any of the Austrian bikes, very linear, very drawn out, couple little mapping options. Good torque feel, not the most aggressive in the class, but definitely very spread out and easy to use. Again, at the end of the day, the lowered suspension has a place if that's what you're looking for. If you think on the conditions you're riding, everything you've heard about a lower center of gravity of bike will work better for you, the Husqvarna has that out of the box. If you're thinking you're in soft conditions, you're going to have this bike loaded really hard between bumps, you think you've got big hill sections, a lot of sand that's going to suck the bike down, and you're just going to go stiffer, that's the point where everyone in the test was just like, well, I would buy the bike that's not lowered for most case situations. Again, that's how the Husqvarna ends up fifth. A bike that we do appreciate in its own way, but in its own unique way. Coming in fourth place is the Kawasaki KX450. This is a bike that did extremely well in our shootout last year, but got bumped down a couple positions slightly due to other bikes' improvements. And there's a big range on the scores this year. This bike finished 2, 5, 4, 6, 4 with our test riders for 21 total points. Let's get right into it. What makes the KX450 good? The chassis. Almost every rider compliments how much comfort there is in this bike. Not only the chassis, but the suspension itself. This is a very comfortable motorcycle. It feels like it's a bike that is very easy to get your maximum out of. That also plays into the power character, which is extremely linear and drawn out. Very long feeling, but very soft. It is the bike that most riders complimented in the test, that they could get to 100% throttle opening the easiest, which at times was a positive, but in other positions you could just feel it lagging behind its competition in output. Strangely enough, sometimes the earlier portion of the day when the track is the most prepped is when it feels the most rewarding, because you can just go wide open everywhere. At times later in the day, that lesser power can be a positive, but also in some places compared to other 450s where traction is just so low that you're still tiptoeing, when you have to creep around a corner and then point it straight up a hill, everything else in the class will outpull this bike. The mapping updates to the app to be able to get a little bit more mapping options out of it was appreciated, but still not a big enough difference to overcome the overall lack of output. This bike still gets jokingly labeled as the KX350. The suspension package, again, is good front and rear, decent balance, and a Kawi that has had more front-end turning ability than a KX450 has ever seen in its life, but can also be squatted down and rear steered like a Kawasaki of old. One other negative that comes to the bike, and this is mostly due to the lazy power character, is a heavy feeling front end. Mostly noted to other bikes, more riders than ever felt like this year that the Kawi just felt a little heavy on the nose end of the bike. because that power is more tractor-like. Every time you see a braking bump and you want to blip into a corner or do something exciting, instead of the bike reacting and popping up to life with a good snap response, it just kind of tractors into the bump. It has consistent traction, but it just moves forward. The KX450 is appreciated for all the ergonomics change on it. You can drop the pegs, move the bars forward. You can really get this bike suited to a wide range of riders. But overall, again, the weighted front end feel and the lazy power character is honestly what keeps it in fourth place. With more power, this bike would easily be on the podium, if not competing for a win. Landing the bottom step on the podium is the KTM 450 SXF with third overall. This bike amongst our test riders scored 3, 2, 3, 3, 3. So basically, this bike did not finish off the podium with any rider and seems to have a very solid average score that gives it 14 points overall, and it actually only missed out on second by 1 point, which we will get to. So why did the KTM land where it did? Well, compared to years past, compared to primarily last year, our test riders did enjoy it more. The updated chassis that we first saw on the factory edition bike this year, it is more soft, it is supple compared to the outgoing chassis. The outgoing one was precise and fun on a 1 or 2 lap pace, but wasn't great throughout the day and wasn't as good track to track as it could be. The new chassis is much more enjoyable throughout the day. It is better track to track. The changes you make at one track seem to carry over better. So the bike just has a wider window of operation than it did in prior years. The mapping is cleaned up. That's something we've kind of had over the past couple years. The KTM power plant is good, but sometimes is a little gurgly initially, maybe not the cleanest running 450 in class. It feels very precise this year. The KTM, compared to its Austrian brethren, has the most aggressive power feel of the group, but it's still very linear and easy to ride. Maybe compared to the Yamaha or Honda, not quite as much bottom end grunt, but still an overall very strong engine package that loves to sing. Again, the chassis is a lot more comfortable this year, and KTM has put in the work with WP. The rear shock was fairly enjoyable for most riders, but at the end of the day, the front fork still is a little bit of a holdup for some guys. The air fork is the best it's ever been, and we can get it working pretty darn good. However, once you ride against, say, the Yamaha with the KYBs, or even the plush feeling of the Honda, or the Kawi, man, the KTM just doesn't quite stack up on overall suspension comfort. It is a very racy feeling bike. Even the cockpit area of the bike, it's maybe not as open feeling as the Honda or the Yamaha. It is a little bit more of a jockey feeling position. It's very race ready, as KTM's slogan always states. And again, the bike just feels like it's ready to race out of the box. Great brakes, great hydro clutch, a lot of high-end premium feel in this motorcycle. But overall, what holds it back from finishing up any further tends to be overall suspension comfort, which adds to comfort in the rider throughout the length of the day. It's a bike that performs better early to mid today, feels a little bit more unruly at the end. And overall, I think riders wish they maybe could get a little bit more grunt out of the initial part of the engine, or had a little more options with engine mapping. The mellow to aggressive map has a minor feel in this bike. Not much, and there's not much else we can do beyond that. Now, beating the KTM by only 1 point for second overall was the new Honda Sierra 450R. It scored 4, 3, 2, 2, and 2 amongst our test riders for 13 points overall. How did the Honda make such a big jump compared to the last couple years? The bike is, again, more of a generational change or evolutionary change than a revolutionary. It's mostly just chassis, airbox, mapping. It's all it needed. This bike is so much more predictable than the outgoing machine. The Honda Sierra 450R in its prior generation would always get great comments at Shootout in the morning. If you rode the bike early in the day, you were jumping for joy. I'd put you back on the bike at the end of the day, that was gone. The bike was so much harder to set up in its old style. In this generation, this bike right here, anything you do to it carries throughout the day. The bike is calmer, it's more predictable. Maybe it isn't quite as playful at times as the outgoing bike, but it still has that Honda ergo feel. It has the perfect rider triangle. Everybody that jumps on it just feels comfortable. But what they gained again from the old bike is just knowing what it's going to do all day long. Yes, the chassis is stiffer. Yes, at certain points you do feel a little more energy transferred to the body than the old bike, but it's weird to say as it seems more comfortable, because the old bike would bind up like a bad spring and just launch all that energy at once. usually involving trying to launch you off the motorcycle. The new one, very predictable, very planted, very fun. And then the power comes into that. The old bike hit extremely hard, low to mid. It kind of was a little gurgly off the bottom. It had this really aggressive character, but it wasn't the cleanest and easy to ride. The newest power is a lot more linear. It is a lot more drawn out. It is very fun in its base map. A little bit mellow at times. It makes the aggressive map definitely more enjoyable to try. Again, a very long, drawn-out power compared to the old bike, very linear, maybe not quite as exciting at times, and that was maybe one of the drawbacks a little bit to the bike, is they almost went a little too mellow for some of our test riders. And ultimately, the other bit of negativity was the front fork, which is extremely soft this year. We could get the balance pretty well on the bike, we could get the fork working okay, but as we went stiffer to get that hold up, we would start to lose some of that comfort. So we felt like we were compromising on the front end. So again, the bike is way more balanced. It has all that Honda Ergo fun comfort. The power is much easier to use, maybe a tick on the soft side, and maybe a little bit hard to get that fork set up. And really, that's kind of at the end of the day what cost it the W. Coming in first place, defending its title, the Yamaha YZ450F. And this was a commanding win, getting first place with all 5 of our test riders. We may sound like a broken record at this point, but this is the most simple bike for each rider to dial in. Not to say it doesn't take a little bit of tweaking here and there. We noticed on the 25 edition of this bike, a lot of guys liked the way the rear end worked better than last year, but the front fork took a little bit of tuning, with most riders going stiffer on the compression and slower on the rebound to get the fork a little bit more held up and a little bit less busy in places. The overall balance of the bike was easy to maintain, and no matter what, if a rider wanted a balanced bike, a little bit more of a front steer, rear steer, it seemed like everybody was able to adjust the bike pretty simply to what they wanted. The engine is still the top of the class. It has so much torque, so much output everywhere, and pretty much at the end of the day, most of our guys run mellower mapping, different variations. They can go for a very free-feeling style map that has very little engine braking character on the app. They can go for just a very linear power. Most of us went to a more linear, longer, drawn-out power that doesn't feel as aggressive. But if it's soft, it's deep, you just want to have your socks blown off, you can go with the standard maps, or you can go with more aggressive. Again, it just makes great power everywhere. And something that's really fun about the Yamaha, because it has exciting power, because it has a well-balanced chassis, it feels playful. The front end of this bike feels light. It's easy to loft over things into corners. It's just very fun to throw this motorcycle around. It is on the better side of chassis comfort, maybe not quite as much as the Kawasaki, but again, it's just really good everywhere. Best engine in class, best overall suspension package, one of the best chassis. Ergos are middle of the road. Some guys still don't like the very round seat. They don't like the seat base feel in it, but the overall ergonomics of this bike have gone a lot better in the last generational change. The rider cockpit feels much more even than it did in past generations. At the end of the day, like I said, every single one of our test riders would come off the Yamaha. They might have a little complaint here or there, but overall, once they ride everything else, they all came back and just said, man, the Yamaha is just the easiest bike to ride out of the box. And again, one of the things we tell our test riders, tell us in your ranking order, if you had to take these bikes home, stock, able to just play with clickers and whatever mapping options they have for a whole year, what would you want to ride and race all year in this condition? And they all came back and said the YZ450F. Again, the Yamaha is the winner. There are bikes that finish slower. That is not the end all be all. Every motorcycle has traits, and at the end of the day, we want you to find the bike that best suits you. If you're gonna go out and spend your hard-earned money, $8,000, $9,000, $10,000, $11,000 for a dirt bike, and you're truly interested in buying a 450 motocross bike, listen to all the opinions. Click the link in our description, read the article, watch everybody else's shootout. Make sure you spend that money right and get the bike you're going to enjoy. Just because we ranked a bike 4th, it still might be the best machine for you. If you have any questions, any comments, anything you'd like to expand upon further, throw it in that comments section below and we'll do our best to get to it. And as always, thanks for watching here on Vital MX. Make sure you stay tuned for more.